Good morning. Happy Easter morning. I'm recording this around an empty table because it's about 1 o'clock in the morning, but it's the best time to do it. I want to talk today about the focus we have at this time of year on the cross, on the death and then the resurrection of Jesus, and that being the most important event in the Christian calendar. It's the one that everything points to. It's where he conquered death. But I want to look at it a little bit differently, because we're in a time where a world that doesn't want to know him, thinks he's irrelevant. And how is that? So I want to focus on that. It's going to be a very, hopefully for you guys, a short talk, but rich with information. I'm hoping so anyway. I'll give it my best shot. So at this time of year, I tend to be focusing on the cross, like many of us who if you're a Christian, you will be. I found myself literally and physically standing there when we were allowed to go to church, staring at the cross and just reflecting on what he's done for us. And I very often have had the thought, if Jesus walked in and I didn't realise and he wandered up and stood by my side, just off my shoulder there, would he be looking at me like that and then looking at the cross and looking at me and looking at the cross? And he might say to me, what are you doing? What are you up to? So I'm just reflecting on your death and your resurrection. And very often I tend to think he might turn around and say, but what about my ministry? What about the example I laid before you running up to this point? What about that? Everything I did, the examples I laid out in times of pressure, in times of people attacking me in disbelief, in times of forming those relationships with disciples, venturing out into the ministry. What about all those times, the example I laid down for you to follow? And so I just want to delve into that a little bit. We are going to have at LCF a series of Who is Jesus, which will be quite an expansive series of talks, sermons, done by several people, including myself. That's to come. This is not this morning. We can't possibly cover everything that Christ did during his life. So we'll probably just cut it down a little bit to about 15 minutes, all being well. So I've raised a couple of questions to get us going, to lay the foundation to a few key points I'm going to talk about in Jesus' life. Why is Jesus so ignored or despised in our culture? And why is he dismissed as irrelevant? And that tends to be where we are right now, especially in the West, especially in the UK. And it seems to me as nittle by nittle, generation after generation, we give a little bit more land to the enemy, as the moral values that God had put in place, that we should be living by, they get etched away nittle by nittle. And it slowly falls apart. Society slowly falls downwards. And I believe, nittle by nittle, the enemy creeps a little further forward in his deceit, which keeps people from the saving grace of Jesus, ultimately. And that's the way he does it, through deceit. Smoke and mirrors and confusing people. The question for us believers is, can we get the passion in our own lives to be so on fire that our light shines bright? Now, if you read Matthew 5:14 to 16, it says, you are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. And also, can we become the salt of the earth, which he talks about in Mark 9:49 to 50, where he says, everyone will be salted with fire. Salt is good, but if it loses its saltiness, how can you make it salty again? Have salt among yourselves and be at peace with each other. So through prayer and petition, we can help wage war against the enemy's plans. And if you read Philippians 4:6, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And in reference to the enemy's plans, 1 Peter 5, 8-9. Be alert and of sober mind. This is what it says in 1 Peter 5, 8. Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. Resist him, standing firm in the faith, because you know that the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kind of sufferings. So at this time, focusing on Jesus and what he did in his ministry and how he acted, we can be more like him for when he spoke, and also, importantly, when he didn't speak, the things he didn't say. We can actually be more like him. We can be that light, we can be that salt, and we can stand firm on the word of God. And we can demonstrate to people who think he's irrelevant exactly why he's very relevant. And I believe that if Jesus was here now, stood here by our side, he would be encouraging us to be more like him each day, moment by moment within each of those days, recognizing who he was, so that we can make sure we keep ourselves on the narrow road that it talks about, keep ourselves focused on him, and then doing so won't give the enemy a foothold. Of course, we as Christians recognize at this moment in time what a sacrificial thing it was for Jesus to die for us, and furthermore to conquer death and to rise again. But that sacrifice comes after a life of impeccable ministry, lived out moment by moment in complete sinlessness. Jesus showed himself to be the best teacher, the best friend, the best counselor, and a miracle worker during his ministry. So let's look at that a little bit closer, and we'll delve into it. And so it sort of is going to highlight how poignant it is during the time right up to his crucifixion and to when he rose again, to put Jesus in your mindset of the type of person he was and why it was such a catastrophic event at the time when he was hung on that cross, and how terrible it was that someone so amazing was treated in such a way that actually it should make people stop and pause and reflect on that and work out, why was that? And I think that's just going over people's heads. He's a guy that lived a long time ago, wore sandals, and well, there he is. You know, that's how people picture him. How is that relevant to them? And I think describing the character and the traits that Jesus showed, we can get to the bottom of that. We can lay that foundation. So let's start with Jesus is wise. Wiser than anyone else, as proved by anyone who stood up against him. He was never trapped or ensnared by the enemy's plans. And if we enter into Matthew 12, 38-40. Matthew chapter 12, 38-40. Then some of the Pharisees and teachers of the law said to him, Teacher, we want to see a sign from you. He answered, A wicked and adulterous generation asks for a sign. Notice the exclamation mark. But none will be given it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. And so for them listening at that point, they must be thinking, what is going on here? What is going on? At every juncture, he's always a step ahead of everybody. So even some of the wisest people that come to tackle him, he's always ahead of them. So let's have a look at Matthew 16, chapter 16, verses 1-4. The Pharisees and the Sadducees came to Jesus and tested him by asking him to show them a sign from heaven. He replied, When evening comes, you say, It will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, Today it will be stormy, for the sky is red and overcast. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the sign of the times. A wicked and adulterous generation looks for a sign, but none will be given it except the sign of Jonah. Jesus then left them and went away. And so to be able to challenge people, imagine being there. Imagine being part of that council of people. Imagine being one of the Pharisees or one of the Sadducees. Stood there, challenging them, thinking, we are ahead of him here. We're going to pin him in and we're going to show him to be the fool that we think he is. Or the false teacher that we think he is. Or the blasphemer that we think he is. And then his reply each and every time leaves them going, okay. Okay. And so let's carry that on and look at Luke chapter 20, verses 20 to 26. And this is the last one of the examples of his wisdom. As I say, it's just a short, cut down version of who Jesus was. It's in a nutshell, really. Keeping a close watch on him, they sent spies who pretended to be sincere, so they're trying to trick him. They hoped to catch Jesus in something he said. So they're hanging on every single word. It would be the equivalent now of being on TV and having an interview. And they're actually intentionally going out their way, like you see with journalists, to catch the person out, get them to say something wrong. And how many times do politicians say something wrong and trip up? There was none of that from Jesus at all. None of that. He was way above everybody else, superseded everything that had gone before him. They hoped to catch Jesus in something he said, so that they might hand him over to the power and authority of the governor. So the spies questioned him. Teacher, we know that you speak and teach what is right, and that you do not show partiality, but teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. Oh, aren't they lovely, speaking to him like that? Is it right for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not? This is quite well known, this passage. You probably know it even if you're not a Christian. He saw through their duplicity and said to them, so he sees straight through it, full of wisdom and discernment, show me a denarius. Whose image and inscription are on it? Caesar's, they replied. He said to them, then give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. They were unable to trap him in what he had said there in public. And astonished by his answer, they became silent. And so if you just go up a couple words, it was in public. There's loads of people around there in public. And you may have seen the film where he gets the coin, he holds it up. And he's very forthright. And having that authority, the wisdom and the discernment to see through all the plans, the enemy's plans to try and take him down and manipulate him and make him trip up. He sees through all those things. He's ultimately wise. And it shows it through these eyewitness testimonies of him doing this stuff. And so there are many more examples of Jesus' wisdom when contending with his peers in the Gospels. More than we have time for. But you can go and look them up, go and do your research. You can see every time he had an encounter with the Pharisees and go through that. Before we move on to how he showed himself to be the best friend, which is the next topic, friend, it's worth noting in John chapter 21, verse 25, Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have enough room for the books that would be written. Isn't that an intriguing thing? We got some amazing things, amazing accounts written in the Bible about what Jesus did, the prophecy before of who he was going to be and who he's going to become, and what he was going to do, and his ministry. You've got all those things wrapped up in the Bible, and it's saying here that actually he did a lot more than that. It's just that there wouldn't be enough room to put it all in. So not only is this talk in a tiny little nutshell, covering just a few of the little issues or topics, if you like, but it's actually, if you read the whole thing, all about him, you still wouldn't have read everything about him. Incredible. So when you think of a friend, what's a true friend? And I think a true friend is someone that loves you unconditionally. So you can mess up, but that relationship's repaired back up again, and all is forgiven, and hopefully all's forgotten, and you carry on, and your relationship gets stronger from that, and they love you despite your foibles. They overlook them, and they stick with you. And so that's the kind of person that you would be looking for. And Jesus did this for the entirety of mankind. He loved us unconditionally. And so he died on the cross for us, taking the burden of all we've done wrong and offering us everlasting life, essentially for free. Obviously, he was a sacrifice, but for free. But he also demonstrated this love during his ministry. And if you look at John chapter 15, verse 9, as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. Also, John chapter 15, verses 12 to 17. My command is this, love each other as I've loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friend. And we've got that on a poster outside the church in an A-frame. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, and so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command. Love each other. So he reiterates that back. Picture yourself as a servant outside of the circle of Jesus at that time. Imagine you were looking in thinking, I just wish he would notice me. Just bring me into that inner circle, as it were. Bring me into that relationship. And he's offering that here to all of us. He died and rose again, and you can accept that. And you can be in that knowledge. You can be in Christ. Christ can be in you. It's incredible. It's mysterious. It's amazing. But that's the reality. And the underlying principles is love. And furthermore, Jesus is part of the Godhead. He is love. And I hope this graphic on the screen will kind of give you an insight into what the Trinity is if you're not sure. This is supposed to be a helpful graphic to kind of try and explain it for you very briefly. So I hope that's of help. Also, if you look at 1 John 4, chapter 4, verse 8, whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. And you've got 1 John chapter 4, verse 16. And so we know and rely on the love God has for us. God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in them. And I truly believe that society fires on all cylinders when God's commands are adhered to. And one of those we just talked about is love. How much better it is to love one another to death than it is to administer death to one another. So to die for your friend, to die even for your enemy, if you follow Jesus' commands, that is incredible. And instead, in today's world, a lot of people are administering death on people, death on their neighbours, which is so sad, and it deteriorates everything. Now we look around and we see that happening, but that is free will that is given, enabling people to do that. Free will is given to people, so we're just not robots. We've got that choice, and God is saying over and over again, love one another as I have loved you. And in some cases that can be dying for your friend or enemy. Finally, in this expose, we move on to the Jesus, the miracle worker. So this is the last little point we're going to look at. It's worth noting that Jesus expects us to be miracle workers as well, just as with all his other examples of wisdom and love and discernment that we discussed already. Because if you look at John chapter 14, verse 12, it says, very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than these, because I am going to the Father. Pretty incredible. So with that, let's look at 37 miracles that Jesus did. So number 1, we've got Jesus turns water into wine at a wedding, which is his first miracle. Jesus heals an official's son at Capernaum in Galilee. Jesus drives out an evil spirit from a man in Capernaum. Jesus heals Peter's mother-in-law, sick with fever. Jesus heals many sick and oppressed in the evening. First miraculous catch of fish. Jesus cleanses a man with leprosy. Jesus heals a centurion's paralyzed servant. Jesus heals a paralytic. Jesus heals a man with withered hand. Jesus raises a widow's son from the dead. Jesus calms a storm on the sea. Jesus casts demons into a herd of pigs. Jesus heals a woman in the crowd with an issue of blood. Jesus raises Jairus' daughter back to life. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right. Jesus heals 2 blind men. Jesus heals a man who was unable to speak. Jesus heals an invalid. Jesus feeds 5,000 plus women and children. You know the story of Jesus feeds the 5,000. That's 5,000 men. There was also women and children there. Jesus walks on water. And if you think about that, number 19, he feeds 5,000. There's 5,000 people there that could say, no, he did not do that. It was made up. They didn't. And in fact, you could probably easily double that figure, couldn't you? most of the men would have come in with wives, and because they had wives, they probably had children. And so you could say it's 10,000 people. There was opportunity there for a story like that to break, that, you know, you expect basically all of them, if it didn't happen, to say, well, that didn't happen. What are you on about? But they didn't. Jesus walks on water. Jesus heals many sick as they touched his garment. Jesus heals a Gentile woman's demon-possessed daughter. Jesus heals a deaf and dumb man. Jesus feeds 4,000 plus women and children. Jesus heals a blind man. Jesus heals a man born blind. Jesus heals a boy with an unclean spirit. Miraculous temple tax in a fish's mouth. Jesus heals a blind mute. Jesus heals a woman who had been crippled for 18 years. Jesus heals a man. Jesus cleanses 10 lepers. Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. Jesus restores sight. Jesus withers the fig tree. Jesus heals a servant's severed ear whilst he's being arrested. I mean, what a list. Hopefully we can reflect on how Jesus conducted himself under immense pressure, especially where he healed the soldier's ear. And he was under immense pressure more than any man had ever been before or since. And through all that, he conducted himself absolutely flawlessly. And despite all that he did, he was made to endure immense torture. And remember that he did nothing wrong. If you look at that list, it's heal, 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 heal. And it's all about healing, restoring. It's just amazing. That's what he did. And the response was to take, as I've written here, doing nothing wrong. Moreover, tirelessly helping humanity out through teaching and healing. And for that, he was made to carry his instrument of torture up the hill naked, where he was to be nailed to that cross in front of 2 common criminals and a group of jeering people. I mean, seriously, think about that. Think about how crazy that is. You've got his actual hanging on the cross. But the jeering that went on whilst he was walking up there, that would have taken place, and the shouting. After being tortured, I mean, his back was ripped to pieces. You know, it's no joke. Go and look up how the Romans, I mean, they were experts at inflicting this sort of damage on the human body. They studied it endlessly, how to make it as painful as possible. And the crucifixion is the end result of that, the net result of it. But he had torture before then. If he'd just been walked up there and crucified, it would have been terrible. But he was in a state of disrepair before he even got there. And all through it, if you think about this, all through that, he could have rescued himself at any point in time. He'd already proven himself to be the Son of God up until that point, prior to him claiming victory over death by resurrecting again. So up until that point, he had proven his point. But he continued on. So he had the pain and the physical suffering that he went through. He had the people turning against him, spitting at him, jeering at him. And he had to hang himself on the cross. And he was taunted whilst on the cross. Just get yourself down, mate. Get yourself down. If you're truly the Son of God. Clothes torn off him. And yeah. And so, despite all that, he hung on that cross. And he did it for me. And he did it for you. Doing nothing wrong. He went through all of this so you and I could have the gift of salvation. And to finish this talk off, he capped it off absolutely beautifully because he conquered death. And one more thing we're yet to see is his return and how glorious that will be. Every single other thing has been fulfilled. We're just waiting for him to come back again. And you can accept this free gift by believing Jesus is your Lord and Saviour, confessing your sin and repenting of it. And your new life awaits, and the journey starts there. Where will you go for him? I pray this has blessed you immensely. As I say, it's only a short snippet, but I hope it has blessed you. And come along to LCF at some point when we reopen. We will be doing a series on who is Jesus.